Thanks for the claps already. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to come and be with us. Before we get started, I'm going to invite our Spanish language translator to come up to the mic. If there are individuals here who need some assistance with translation, we're going to give them a little direction, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Okay, muy buenas tardes a todos los. Si hay alguien que habla español aquí entre nosotros, que necesita un poquito de ayuda para entender el programa, vamos a invitarlos que pasen aquí adelante para poder ayudarles a entender. Si hay alguien que quiere un poco de ayuda, pasen aquí adelante, por favor. Gracias.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate all of the time that you all are volunteering to be with us here tonight. This is, I believe, number 3 on a series of 10 stops around the state that the department is hosting to have a really important conversation. Before we get started, I want to make sure to thank some folks for hosting us here this evening. Director Stevens, thank you for having us in Bartlett City Schools. Thank you to the principal for allowing us in this beautiful high school. We are here at Bartlett High School. When I walked in, I think I saw cheerleaders and band practices, so it's just about football time in Tennessee, and I cannot wait for that. I also want to welcome Commissioner Lizette Reynolds. We've got a number of folks from the TDOE cabinet who are here. I also recognize that there are other district leaders, school leaders, educators, and family members in attendance tonight, so thank you all for giving us a little bit of time to talk about the topic at hand, which relates to a piece of legislation. A number of years ago, actually, our Tennessee General Assembly passed a piece of legislation that will institute a letter grade system for schools in Tennessee. What that means is that all schools will kind of get an A, B, C, D, or F letter grade, just in the same way you see on a student report card. That piece of legislation was passed a number of years ago. It has not yet been implemented, but it will be implemented for the first time this fall. So ahead of that implementation, the Tennessee Department of Education is going out to community to hear from you, and that's exactly the purpose of the meeting and the convening here this evening. It's to hear from you all and your input about what might be important to you, important to families. What should the school letter grade system actually communicate to members of our community? So as I mentioned, we're here to hear from you tonight. I am going to give you just a little bit of information so that we all kind of have a baseline understanding of the types of things that we want to hear your input on. And then we're actually going to go kind of to the floor, and I will take this opportunity to point out the QR code that you see on the screen. It was on the tables when you signed up and kind of walked in the door this evening. You can sign up using that QR code to speak and tell us what you think. We invite all of you to do that. We also have a number of other opportunities for you to engage in this conversation, but tonight we really want to hear from you. So as I mentioned, I'm going to give us just a little bit, a lay of the land on what we're here to talk about, and then we'll invite public speakers up. We've got microphones that we will bring to you to make sure that everyone can hear the comment that you have and want to contribute to this conversation. And we'll get started with that here in just a few minutes. So with that, I think we'll go on to the next slide. Great, thank you so much, Abby. So this is a little bit of information about that piece of legislation that I've been referencing since we've been together this afternoon. The goal of the department, of course, and everything that we do is to provide children with access to high-quality education. And we want to be able to communicate with our families, with our community members about how we can support not only an individual child's success, but the success of schools and districts all across the state. In that spirit, we are attempting to implement this piece of legislation, again, for the first time this fall. I referenced that it was passed a number of years ago. There was actually some protections on data in terms of what could be used to contribute into a letter grade system that generates A, B, C, D, F grade for a particular school. When you think back kind of to the earlier times when this legislation was on the books, there were some testing administration issues when you think back. Then there was, of course, the pandemic. And so for a number of years, this legislation has not yet been able to be implemented. As we move forward towards this fall and actually rolling out the A through F letter grade system for the first time, we really want to hear from you all on what is most important when we think about measuring a school's academic success or academic performance. When we think about parents and families in the community, certainly in an individual student scope, we know that parents are engaging and family members are engaging. Teachers, educators, administrators certainly are supporting students in classrooms all across the state, including here in Memphis. But we really want to be able to provide information that helps folks engage in those conversations in a meaningful way and be able to support success. So there's the timeline that I referenced earlier. You look at the law passing in 2016, and here we are in 2023. So there's been a number of years of conversation about this piece of legislation. When we think about the requirements, what must we do when we implement this legislation, there are 3 kind of bullet points that are outlined in Tennessee Code and state law. And that says that proficiency needs to be included, growth needs to be included, and other indicators. And so those are the kind of things that we want to have a discussion on here tonight. When we go to our next slide, I want to give just a little bit of an example of the kinds of things we think about and have thought about historically when we talk about kind of measuring academic success in a school. I mentioned proficiency is one that's outlined in the law as a component that must be required in the A through F letter grade system. Proficiency is really intended to be a measure of a student's mastery of academic standards. We know that Tennessee teachers come together and work to develop rigorous academic expectations for students in each subject and at each grade. Proficiency is how well that student is mastering those expectations, meeting those expectations, or maybe they need a little extra support to be able to meet those academic standards and proficiency. Growth is another component, different than proficiency and also a really important measure that must be included in the A through F letter grade system. When we think about growth at an individual student level, it's how much that student has grown or improved over a course of time. Similarly, we can think about growth at a school level or even at a district level, but it's different than an academic mastery or meeting of academic standards. So it's another indicator that we can use as an example of things that communicate academic success to parents and families. Chronically out of school is a bullet up here on this slide, and really what that references is absenteeism. We know that when children are not in classrooms with their teachers, that they are limited in their ability to gain and absorb all of the knowledge and skills that their teachers are conveying to them. And so of course that has impacts when children are not in classrooms for a long period of time or for a lot of the school year. It impacts their ability to be successful and may then impact a school's kind of measure of academic performance. English language proficiency is a bullet point down here at the bottom. And when we think about individual students or subgroups of students, we know that students are different and wonderfully unique. We also know that students may need additional supports. And so when we think about our English learner community in particular, those who are just now grasping and mastering the English language, there might be some considerations when we come to this A through F letter grade conversation about whether that type of indicator or other similar indicators for particular subgroups of students should apply. I also want to take a moment to point out that indicators, as I mentioned, that other indicators bullet in the piece of legislation could look different between different types of schools. So when we think about elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, some indicators in high school may not apply to elementary and vice versa. So we can actually have a really collaborative conversation about what does it look like to measure academic success, academic performance in that elementary school space, or in the middle school space, or in the high school space. Those things can look different. So I share this slide just to kind of give us some examples of the types of things that could be included in a letter grade calculation. Of course, as I mentioned, those two bullets with the star and the little chart, proficiency and growth must be included in the calculation, and other indicators that are to be decided. And so that's what we really want to do tonight, is have a conversation about these components of the A through F letter grade system. And we want to ground this conversation and hear from you a response to some questions, like how do we think about measuring academic success in a school? When we think about parents and families later this fall that go on a website and see, my local elementary school or my local high school, and you see the names of the folks who are associated with that school, you see the address, you see the website, and you see a letter grade, whether that's A, B, C, D, or F. What are some of the assumptions that parents are making when they see that letter grade, right? When you see an A, let's think about some of the assumptions that a parent or a family member, a community member might make or have about that particular letter grade. What we really want to hear from you all tonight about is how do we go about crafting and co-creating a calculation that generates A, B, C, D, F grades for schools, and what needs to make that up. So we know that proficiency, growth, and other indicators are kind of the sandbox that we must play in. We really want to hear some input from you all as we go about this process. I mentioned that this, I think, is the third of 10 total town halls that we will have across the state. We've actually got another one tomorrow night in Memphis. We'll be at Southwest Tennessee Community College. But we're going around to different communities across the state to hear from folks and really bring voices to the table, input to the table to inform these discussions as we move forward with implementation. So at this point in time, I want to give us just a little bit of instruction about how to interact tonight and how to say your piece. I mentioned that QR code that you saw on the table when you checked in. You'll see it on some slides up here. You can use it at any time to sign up. That's actually what we're here to do, is hear from you. So I would encourage all of you who are interested in this conversation to sign up to speak. Everyone who signs up to speak this evening will have a couple of minutes. As I mentioned, we have a microphone that is available to you all so that everyone can kind of hear what your comments or questions might be. But I will stand up here and call names, essentially. And so I'll call the first person, I'll set my timer, and we'll hear that go off. I'm going to step away from the microphone when I do that. And when your timer is coming up, you're just about out of time, I'm actually going to step back closer to the podium as kind of a visual cue that your timer is just about done and it's time for the next person to speak. So that's how we'll go about this evening. We're going to turn now to the public comment component of this town hall. So I think we will go ahead and get started. We have Mr. Bob Nardo, who is signed up to speak first. So Bob, we'll get the microphone to you, sir. I know you are way at the back of the auditorium, but you were up first, sir, and so let me get my timer started and you can take it away in just a moment. All right, go ahead.
Give me hello. Okay. Hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you so much for everything the Department of Education has done over the last several years to bring an ever higher expectation for what our kids can do, but also investing in that with resources, with high-quality curriculum, with parent choice, the things we need to make our school system more successful. I'm in my 9th year as the director of Libertas School in Fraser in Memphis. We are one of the most successful turnaround schools in Tennessee. When we took this school over 9 years ago as part of the Achievement School District, it was the second lowest achieving school in the entire state. Last year, we were the #1 highest achieving charter school in the city of Memphis. And so we've kind of, we're serving a population that is more than twice as poor, more than twice as disabled, and more than twice as at risk as the population in Tennessee overall. And so I think one of the first things that any parent or any citizen wants to know when they're looking at a report card like this is, are we comparing apples and oranges, or are we comparing apples to apples? And as much as I appreciate the sentiment of a single letter grade to let everyone know, is this school doing well or not, we have to be concerned about how misleading that can be. Because a letter grade can be based on different things. And if it is a snapshot of current performance, if you look at my school's proficiency right now and say, what was your proficiency last year? You're going to say, that's pretty mediocre compared to the state of Tennessee. But when you look at our students' academic growth over the last 9 years, you're going to say, this is one of the most impressive schools in Tennessee. And then when you look at our subgroup performance, which also does not necessarily come through in a single letter grade, you're going to see students with disabilities, low-income students, performing in the top 15% of their subgroup for the entire state. So actually, you're better off going to our school than a wealthy school with a higher overall proficiency, but whose at-risk students are doing worse because it's hidden behind a single number that averages those things out. And so I think growth and comparison to appropriate subgroups in other schools are the most important thing to be thinking about changing in the letter grade system. And here's my last suggestion. Let's make a report card with letter grades, right? Let's have 2 or 3 grades, just like a kid would get on a report card, that speak both to proficiency in the snapshot sense. Sure, that matters. But let's also give weight to subgroup performance and to academic growth. And schools can have grades in those areas so that your report card is giving you a holistic picture. I don't want my school to be graded just on our PE grade. So let's have a report card that tells the whole story. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You stayed right in the time limit. I'm very impressed. Thank you, Mr. Nardo, for your comments. I'm checking to see if there are others who have signed up to speak tonight and want to make sure that you all are aware that this is your opportunity to say your piece. We are going to be collecting emails. But of course, we're really interested in hearing from you all. And I think some of the comments at the back of the room give us some really healthy input from a school leader here in Memphis. We're interested in hearing from others. You can see the QR code down at the bottom of the screen. For those who might want to say something on the record, I would encourage you to go ahead and sign up. Until we have others who sign up, I want to make sure to kind of lift some questions. And I think we've got a slide that's got a real key question on it that we can flip to. A few quick key questions that we can flip over to, and it includes things like, what are your top priorities for measuring a school's academic success? So it's kind of another way to think about it. When we think about academic success at a school level, and you're considering from a family, parent, community member perspective, what are the top priorities they might want to know from a letter grade? You know, I said something earlier in this town hall, when we think about assumptions, we will be implementing a letter grade system that rolls up to 1 letter grade. Of course, there will be sub-indicators to that. But what are some of the assumptions that parents might have when you see an A versus a B versus a C, D, F? Are those assumptions correct? How would we craft and co-create a calculation for letter grades that kind of provides parents and families the types of information they want to know? So I'll encourage others to come up to the microphone or sign up online. You can raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you. But I would encourage us to think a little bit and provide some more input here tonight on the types of things that could or should go into a calculation for school letter grades. Others who might have input to contribute. When we think about academic success at a school level, and we think about parents seeing a particular letter grade, what should that letter grade represent to you? Are there folks who want to comment on that question? Seeing getting volunteered out here. I am seeing lots of kind of little, huddles and small group conversations. Really invite you to contribute that for the group today. There is no wrong answer. Also would encourage you to consider questions, right? You can ask questions in terms of public comment. I want to know. I need to know. I'm not sure what I think about this, and here's why. Really interested in hearing from you this evening. Yes, sir. Let us bring you a microphone. We will bring you up. Go ahead.
My question is this, is that it's very confusing. We now have a new funding formula of TISA that's all about the individual learner, but you're fixing to group all of us in the same categories with these letter grades. What might be successful at a large high school may not be the same at a rural high school. They're not the same, you're apples to oranges again. So it's very confusing as a director of schools because you're giving us a new set of rules and you're going to give us a letter grade, and we still have not even received all our TVAS scores and everything else. So it's very difficult for me as a director of schools to explain to my stakeholders what's going on when it hasn't even been explained to us as a director of schools. That's my biggest concern. And also, for example, like chronic absenteeism. We have no control over that whatsoever. And also, most parents don't realize it doesn't matter if it's an excused absence or unexcused absence, it's an absence. And that goes against you. I'll be the very first to admit this. My son was chronically absent last year because he had COVID and then he had allergy. He was out for 15 or 19 days on illness. But that doesn't matter in this formula because you could have a very good reason why. Or a very transient school district like myself where we have English as a second language, we have a lot of Spanish-speaking students that are gone at a month at a time. They're gone because they went back home for their parents. You know, it's just, we're trying to put everybody in the same category, and it's not going to fit. And when I see an A, I think of excellence. When I see an F, I see a failing school, and that could be farthest from the truth. And that's my concern, is not being able to explain to my stakeholders what's coming out of the State Department when they're looking for me for the answers. So that's my biggest concern. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You threw yourself on the sword. I appreciate you giving that public comment very much, and I think that was all very, very good thoughts. Want to talk a little bit about some of the components. You named out chronic absenteeism, which was one of the bullet points that we saw on the slide up here. We heard about that in another town hall, actually. So appreciate those comments. Have heard a lot about kind of the indicators, in this conversation, the difference in apples and oranges. Are we comparing apples to apples or not? And how do we make this system kind of actually apply to all schools? It might lead us into another conversation that we talked about a little while ago, which is high school versus middle school versus elementary school, and what we expect would be happening kind of for students in those particular grade bands. I'm interested to hear their reactions to the comment that we've heard thus far. Are there ideas about other indicators that we could consider in an A through F letter grade system, whether it might apply only for an elementary school, only for a middle school, only for a high school? Others who might want to share? Yes, sir, I see your hand. If you would state your name.
Oh, awesome. My name is Brad Ratliff. My question is just about, and it may already be explained, but is there a consequence for a school getting an F? Is there, besides a parent not liking it, which they can't just, but is there a consequence for that?
I mean, that's, I just want to clarify just a couple of things. Number one, when we talk about the A through F system itself, that's legislation. The legislation says it's at the school level, A through F. I mean, that's in statute, right? That's what we're trying to do, is implement that statute. And when we talk about A through F, we're talking about a ratings name, a nomenclature, right? We're not talking about, the reason for A through F is that's what parents understand. That's what the most public understands. I know what an A is, I know what a B is, C, right? Like, you have in your mind what that is. But that's not really the issue, if that makes any sense. What we're trying to understand is, so what to you in elementary school deserves, makes up for an A elementary? Is it that their third grade reading, growth, and proficiency in whatever is at 20%? Should that be an A school? If it's like an absolute, all things together, growth and achievement, 20%, is that really an A? So what is going on there? And it helps us understand, too, how can we really think about not consequences, but resources? I mean, part of this is, okay, you get a grade, now what? And I think that's the other question we need to answer as a community. Now what? How can the state support or get out of the way so that you can continue to support your sub-pops, your English language learners. Like, it's really about thinking about this in a more holistic way so that we can figure out how to best support. And so I know it's frustrating. I mean, I've heard from a lot of y'all, I've talked to a lot of you about this, but I just want to just lay it out like really straight. It's not about A through F. That is just the nomenclature. That's just the name, that's the rating system. Like in Utah, a C, the equivalent of a C in Utah is typical. Do you really want to say, oh, well, I'm a typical school? Like, what does that mean? And so that's the reason for A, B, C, D, F. Now, what we're asking is, what are some additional indicators, additional opportunities to really think about the information that y'all and your leaders have at each of these campus levels, and how is it all working together, and what else do you want to know? What else do you think parents want to know? So, and I, you know, this isn't about pointing fingers. This isn't about not supporting schools or the public system. This is exactly about how we can better support the system. So I just wanted to, I just, you know, been chomping at the bit here a little bit. But that's the kind of conversations we want to have. And it doesn't have to be here. Again, it could be, you know, again, send us an email or send me an email. But you know, we need to implement this in the most fairest way. And we need to hear from you what that is.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ashlyn Sparks. I see you standing up way over here in the back. We're going to bring you a microphone, and then I will start your timer. All right, ma'am, introduce yourself. You're good to go.
Yes, hi, my name is Ashlyn. I work with the Memphis Lift, which is a parent organization in Memphis. And I know if Miss Sarah were here, she would want to say some things, so I'll go ahead and say them for her. So I think first, coming from a parent perspective, the first thing that jumps out at me and my work with parents is, like, how is this going to be communicated? I think parents are already kind of bogged down with portals and links and websites and phone calls and text messages. So how can this be integrated into communication systems that are already in place, whether that's putting it on the student report card as that goes out or the student progress report as that goes out? Just however parents are already used to receiving information, somehow integrating this into that I think would be incredibly helpful. And then also this kind of feeds into what was just being talked about, but balancing support with accountability. I think something that's true for a lot of parents we work with is just like a rise in frustration with how schools have not been supporting or not been preparing their students for their futures. And I think that's only rising, and having another data metric to show that, I think, is going to grow that frustration. But a part of that conversation too is support. So, like, how are these schools going to be supported, especially with TISA already looking at rewarding schools that are doing well as they should, but that then means that these schools will be missing out on that money. So if they're missing out on that money, how can we support parents, and how can we support these students, and how are we going to communicate those supports? I know with a lot of the literacy supports that were put out from the pandemic, we had so many parents who were not aware of those, who did not know that tutoring should have been available, who did not know that there were different resources online, there were different tangible resources they could have received at their school. I mean, we had one focus group with 25 parents, and nobody could say they knew any of that. So I think once these things are in place, very intentional communication with parents in ways that maybe haven't been done before. Like, if old communication models aren't working, we need to rethink how these things are being communicated and get this information in the hands of parents so they can help their students as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sparks, for your comments. Others who want to contribute to the discussion today? Additional questions that have come to mind, considerations when we think about implementing A, B, C, D, F, and that nomenclature and what it represents and how we can kind of come into support. Looking for some hands. I see you, sir. We're going to bring you a microphone. If you would please introduce yourself and then go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Llewellyn Nelson. I'm presently a substitute teacher for Shelby County. One of the things that I think should be factored into this discussion is deportment, behavior and deportment. That is very important because the academic achievement and the growth is going to be, the behavior and deportment is going to affect academic achievement and growth. So I think that should be factored in. Teachers are under pressure right now. They're leaving the classroom, as everybody knows, because of behavior. So somewhere in there, they should be factored into these grading systems.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nelson, for your comments. Others who want to contribute? Other questions that might come to mind? Oh, I see this gentleman over here. We're going to bring you a microphone, sir. If you would please introduce yourself. Go ahead, get started.
Good evening. Antonio Burt, CEO of KIP Memphis. So when I think of A through F, I really think about there needs to be conversation around, in whichever category is selected, what are the subcategories that determine the overall? For example, academic achievement for elementary schools should definitely factor in third grade performance. High school should have strong indicators around Algebra 1, English 1, because when you just think about the overall holistic grade, the parents and the stakeholders, whether inside the school or external, they need to know what comprises that grade. Another thing with A through F that I think that we need to have conversation around is, what strategy does this actually fit into? For example, I lived and worked in Florida. We had A through F there for years. But it fit into a larger strategy that was a statewide strategy. So if you wanted the L300 schools, you got different types of intervention. And my concern is if A through F rolls out with there not being any statewide intervention strategy, what would that mean for teachers inside of the building, school leaders, parents to say, hey, even though my school is a F or D school, they now will receive these additional types of supports. So I think there's room for that to really take hold, and for educators to really be bought into it, because A through F can be a good thing when it's done a part of a larger strategy and not done in isolation.
Very good. Thank you so much for your comments, Mr. Burt. Others who might have something to say and want to chime in, building on the discussion we're having. We heard some really good considerations for elementary versus high school in that previous comment. Other ideas that are coming to your mind? We're going to look up here at the slide. What should an A, B, C, D, F school represent? It might be another way to think about it. What does A represent when we think about elementary or middle or high school versus other grades that could be applied to that school? What should an A represent? Interested to hear your comments. That's a great question. I will repeat it so everyone can hear. The question was, will the letter grades apply only to schools or school districts? This is a school-based letter grade system. Of course, there are other ways that we can rank and kind of, talk about district performance, but schools is where the A through F letter grade system applies. Others who might want to comment. When we think about what an A might represent, interested to hear your commentary and your input there. Thank you, ma'am. If you would please introduce yourself, then go ahead and get started.
Oh, well, thank you. Vanita Doggett, Memphis Education Fund. So one of the issues I think that is longstanding and might also give some context to why there is so much silence in this is that it is very hard to understand what any of this looks like, because for so many years, the AMOs have been a moving target when it comes with cut scores and other things that districts and schools have faced. And so whatever issues we may have in, say, a major metro like Memphis and Shelby County also kind of shows up again when you look at rural schools and the amount of poverty and how well students do perform in those areas versus something like Bartlett or Germantown, where maybe that looks a little bit different. So it's very hard to say this is actually what it should represent without taking a look at what has been historically inequitable when it comes to how cut scores are defined across the district. And so I am not certain that I can tell you exactly what that should look like, except for thinking about how we can assign those letter grades in an equitable fashion that takes into account how each school district historically performs and what that should possibly be. And then again, when you talk about resources and what those districts or schools may need in order to boost academic achievement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Doggett. That's a comment that I haven't heard yet. It's actually kind of the historical consideration. Thank you for providing that input. Others who have comment or question, considerations that you would like to contribute to this discussion? If you feel like you've got something you want to say, please feel free to raise your hand. I see you, sir, in the pink shirt in the back. We are going to bring you a microphone. If you would introduce yourself, go ahead and get started.
My name is Ethan Randall. I'm the principal of Elmore Park Middle School here in Bartlett. As we think about, looking at the definition on here, that ensure every child across the state has access to high-quality education. Has there been any consideration thinking about what other offerings are involved in schools, both from K-12, that include thinking like theater here, the arts? You mentioned that you saw a band and all these other people going on at schools. That's part of, especially from a public's view, from a parent's view, part of a quality education. What other opportunities do my children have the opportunity to participate in? So just kind of a question to think about when we're scoring schools and what a parent is thinking in their head when we score schools.
Thank you very much, Mr. Randall. That's a very helpful comment. And we've actually heard some similar things about what other components of schoolhouse may be represented in a calculation. We were in the eastern part of the state and heard a lot about social studies and science and those academic subjects and how they have not typically been included in some of these systems before. Should they be included now? So I hear you talking about the other things that happen in the school, providing kind of that well-rounded experience. Should that be a part of this letter grade system? Thank you very much for contributing that, sir. Others who have comments? Things that we can take forward in our discussion as we implement this fall. You can literally hear the pin drop. I'm looking out across the room. I've seen a couple of folks who have chimed in. I think there might be a couple others who are thinking about something to say. I will give us a couple more minutes to think through those comments. If you would like to contribute, please feel free to raise your hand. All right, we've got Director Stevens down here. Sir, if you would please state your name and then go ahead and get started.
David Stevens, Superintendent of Bartlett City Schools. I do think that growth is definitely an important factor, as some of my colleagues, I've heard Bob back there talk about it, my good friend from KIP. I mean, that is extremely important, I think, growth. I think the problem is the department and Commissioner, y'all have been dealt almost an untenable hand, because to me, the discussions we had when this first started is it's very difficult to distill down to one letter grade the experience that a child has in a school. So the thought was, and I understand what the legislation says, but it seems to me that you should get a grade for growth. You should get a grade for achievement. You should get a grade for absentee, all of those things. Just like a student's report card. They don't get a report card and it says you got a 4.0 or a 3.2. I want to know how my child did in English, math, science, all those subjects. So I think it's, and I understand the situation you're in, so it's really difficult for me to say, well, what are those other things that need to be put into that, because it's one grade. And the thing that's really disturbing about what should be an A, B, C, D, F school represent, that's not going to be the question. The question is going to be, what it does represent in the public's eyes. And that's I think, is the heartburn that we've had and that people have had. We're all for, like we said before, we were for letter grades. Give us a grade. Let us know how our schools are doing in each district. But like Mr. Randall said, fine arts, all of those things are components. So it's an imperfect system that you have to try to make work. But it is very difficult because I think the public's perception is if a student's in an F school, they're not going to be in that, they're not going to keep their kid in that school. But there may be really great things happening, and you may end up with some schools that are B's or C's that may not be, it's very narrow what you're looking at, and it's going to make it very difficult. And it really needs to be addressed. Like I said, I've been doing this a really long time. Want to keep doing it for a long time, but it's getting to the point, I think, where sometimes things become untenable, and then what do you do? As one of my colleagues said, we got teachers leaving the profession left and right, and what is it going to do to morale when those teachers walk in? Because we know when we went to the evaluation model, everybody wanted to be a 5. Well, we knew not everybody was a 5, but now we're going to put this out that, and those teachers are going to be totally devastated, and that's one of the concerns that I have, because we've got to keep fulfilling that pipeline of teachers. So, and I know that's probably why there's a lot of folks not saying a lot, because it's untenable. I mean, what we've been dealt with, it's pretty much untenable. So, Commissioner, I appreciate you. I appreciate your team. I appreciate the job. But I think if we all really continue to work together, we can come out with some good outcomes, because we do want to see every student in Tennessee succeed. We want to see every school be successful. And I think all of us working together, hopefully we can get there.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens, for your comments. Working together, I will ditto and retweet that comment, and I appreciate you jumping up to provide some public comment. We're working together here tonight at the Town Hall. Thank you, sir. I will do kind of a last call for additional comments for those who are in the room. I know we've been here for about 45 minutes. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I also want to make sure that we have given everyone an opportunity who would like to speak tonight, the opportunity to do so. So if there are any others who would like to speak, please take this moment to raise your hand. I think I've got, I see a few different hands go up. We're going to come to you, sir, in the blue polo shirt. Yes, sir, you. If you would please state your name, and then we're going to come back over to this side of the room for our next speaker. Introduce yourself. Go ahead and get started.
Yes, ma'am. Is it on?
You're on.
I'm Murph Appling. I was in the classroom at Germantown and Southwind, and I'm now an active substitute. And I just, with what Coach Griffin and Coach Stevens had to say, you got a lot of moving parts here, and you're not going to be able to satisfy everybody, because we all know, everybody in this room knows, that education starts at home. And if things at home are lousy, that poor kid's going to come in with no breakfast and been up all night listening to his parents beat the hell out of each other, or what? And that's also an accommodation you've got to make also. I remember I had one kid working 30 hours a week to put food on his family's table, right, Coach? I mean, you know what I'm talking about. So, Johnny, you give me your best effort, and we'll go from there. That's all I'm asking for, is your best effort. Now, if you want specifics, now I don't want to point any fingers because I know these two guys, but at the same time, all this is going to start at the top. And if I were a parent today, I'm not, I'm a taxpayer now, but if I were a parent today and walked into the high schools where I substitute, and the tardy bell rings, and 25 to 30% of the student body is still walking the halls with their bloody cell phones in their hands, or earplugs, or whatever you want to call it, around their head. What is that going to tell a parent? And right across the street, you've got $300,000 and $400,000 homes, and the district is soaking these people in property taxes to pay for this school, so these kids can walk the hall and not have to get to class on time. Okay? That's another area. The second complaint, and this gentleman here probably gets the same thing, from the classroom teacher. Well, I write up Bo Griffin and I write up Dave Stevens, they've been late 10 times this semester and nothing happens. Now, how are you going to grade that? And I know these are little nitpicky things, but that's just the way I feel as a taxpayer. So thank you very much. And I think you want to...
Thank you, sir, for your comments. We're going to come over here to this gentleman, and then, sir, we will come back to you. I think we had a person who raised their hand. Victoria, is there somebody over by you? Okay. Yes, sir, if you would just reiterate your name and go ahead.
Antonio Burt, last statement with the academic performance, I think it's important just looking at this for us to really focus on the subgroups. For example, how not only just ELL, but students with disabilities, specific ethnic groups. My fear is if we don't look at the subgroups, we can holistically mask the data to where individual subgroups can be grossly underperforming, but the majority can be performing at a high level, and the school get an A overall, but this subgroup is in essence an F. You know, we see that happening at different places where that particular subgroup parents end up filing lawsuits against school districts. So I would like to see with academics have weights based on each of the subgroups that's within that school as well.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Burt. You going to jump in here, sir, if you would say your name?
Yeah, my name is Brad Ratliff. I just was real quick, just from a parent's perspective, the A for me, and I think for most parents would be, there's not much room for improvement. So that needs to be, in my mind, just so you know from my perspective, if a school gets an A, I mean, we're talking high quality, top of the line. And I think from a parent's perspective, if a school gets an A and you walk in and you see, you know what I'm talking about, from that grade perspective, there's going to be some expectations that that's almost perfect. And 1A is perfect, right? So, yeah. So.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Ratliff. Additional comment? I'm going to trust that no one else has signed up online because I'm keeping checking, but I see our hands are raising. Yes, sir. Restate your name, please. Go ahead.
Again, my name is Llewellyn Nelson. I just spoke a few minutes ago, but I just want to say, add one more comment to this, and my fellow sub here, he made it very clear. I mean, he said it the way I could not say it. We have to, you know, consider seriously the root of this system. Like you said, first, it starts from home. Behavior right now in the school system, and I want to stress this because I know the Tennessee Department of Education representatives are here tonight. I want to stress this. Behavior in the school is paramount important. Students cannot learn if they don't know how to behave. And like he said, he writes John up or Tim or whoever 10 times. Nothing is done. So behavior. And then the next thing I want the Department of Education to consider, we talk about graduation rate in the high school. These students who are graduating, are the grades that they're getting, the A's and the B's, are they real grades or phantom grades? I want you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nelson. I actually appreciate that we're kind of iterating on our comments and conversation. I appreciate that folks are jumping back in because, as I mentioned, this is an active discussion that is going to go on for the next month or so. So at this point in time, I'm going to look for a last call for comments for those who are in the room. And I'm going to show you one more slide, and then I'm going to let you go home and have dinner. Any other last comments? Okay, if we can move to the final slide, I want to make sure to give you all an ongoing opportunity. As I mentioned, you are invited to contribute to this conversation as much as you would like. Whatever you want to say, we want to hear it. So again, tomorrow we are going to have another town hall just like this one. We'll be at Southwest Tennessee Community College. All of the information is on our website if you would like to come and visit with us there. I appreciate those of you who have chimed in this evening. I also want to take a minute to point out this website that's on the slide here, School Letter Grades. at tnedu.gov. That website and that that email address will be open until September 15th. We are encouraging you to submit any comment. Doesn't have to be anything formal. In fact, you can just jot us a few lines and zip it on over. But we're going to have this opportunity open for Tennesseans all across the state in an ongoing way. So please take advantage of that if you would like to kind of follow along with our discussion, or if you go home and have additional thoughts or additional questions that you want to put on our radar. We want to hear from you. So at this point in time, I will thank you all for coming and giving us some time with you all tonight. We, as a department team, are going to stick around for any additional folks who might want to come before the end of the town hall. But appreciate you all being with us. Hope you get home safe. Thanks so much.